And you've just heard Star Chamber, which is the title track from Peter Cat's new album, which is out now. And I'm joined now by Peter Cat himself. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Ali. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure on my part. And before we get into Star Chamber, the album, can you talk a bit about that track we've just heard, the opening track?
Yeah, that I can. So the opening track, Star Chamber from the album Star Chamber, that was the sort of first song that I'd written and brought to the band for, I suppose, what we can call a new era for Peter Cat.
Right.
And it was the first one that was like, I want to say written for the band that I now have, written to their strengths, if you know what I mean. Because Peter Cat was just a solo project, sort of maybe had some session players. For quite a few years, it wasn't really fixed until a few years ago we settled on what I'd say is the definitive lineup. So I was writing that particular song, almost as like a test of how far can we push the envelope of being, you know, really difficult, but still operating within the format of what you'd maybe say is more or less a conventional 3 and a bit minute pop rock song.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of funny stuff going on in there. There's the sort of time signature shifts, a lot of dissonance, a lot of stuff that hadn't really kind of explored with Peter Cat before. But you know what? Because the band I now have are so good, they took it and they ran with it, and it took us a while to get over the hurdle. I tell you, it took us about a year probably to learn that song definitively because there were so
Right.
many bits and bobs, and bits of it are in 5/4 time, some of it's in sort of 7/8 time, all these weird sort of like snips and changes and such. And it was really a grueling mountain to climb for a while. But when it all finally clicked, it made perfect sense to us at least. I don't know about to your average listener, but I guess I'm not to be the judge of that. But I suppose it was a test of how far, as I say, could we push that envelope of the conventional pop rock song without totally losing people. So it's a tightrope we're walking, and as I say, I don't know how many people we've lost, but I think we've gained a few as well.
So it's interesting going into this idea of a new era of Peter Cat, as you say, the first kind of band, if you've like solid set band that you've had as well. So how did that change the way you worked? Were you able to ask them to try new things, and were they bringing things to you in terms of the music?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me it was a continuation of how I've been writing music on the previous EP. I suppose when Peter Cat started, way back when you and I first chatted on my first album, Peter Cat was still largely like a solo project of mine, and it was quite firmly in that, I suppose you'd say, this sort of twee indie pop mold, conventional songwriting. And then the next EP I did called The Magus, which a few years ago was starting to kind of get away from things like conventional songwriting and song structures and bringing more of that mentality of like, right, just let's sit down with a bunch of instruments and we'll just kick this thing off and we'll see where this piece of music takes us. I'm not going to think about choruses, verses, hooks, any of that business. I'm just going to let the music lead. And strangely enough, I felt like the response to that way of writing that I'd kind of almost learned or taught myself on the Magus was warmer than maybe the previous stuff. So
All
with
right.
Star Chamber, I was just like, let's ramp that up to 11. So I went away, I sat and I write the songs, I'll sort of demo the whole thing, I'll set them out on my own. But then when I bring them to the band, it's like just they're able to elevate the playing and the tone, the tonality of the whole thing in a way that I could never do on my own. And as I say, playing to the strengths of the band, like Kev, a long-time drummer, is a real punk drummer, so he was able to add this kind of scratch and this grit on the drums. And then Kylie, our guitar player, comes from this almost like goth metal tradition, so she's able to take things like that I've maybe got sitting at 5, and she'll push them right up to 11. So the band are like incredibly receptive, and a lot of the ideas, the sort of flourishes on there are theirs. So I'm bringing the kind of bare bones structure, if you like, the arrangement, and I'm saying that's it. But within that, you've got so much freedom to add your own spin. It's a great working relationship I've got with the band.
I think there's always been something theatrical about your music and your performances and bringing in other things as well. And when we talk about influences, but this time, as you suggest, there's that plus, you've really maybe got the band to realize your dreams, if that's not too flowery a way of putting it.
Not at all. Absolutely. I mean, 100%. This is not something I could ever have achieved on my own, because I'm not, I would say I'm a competent musician, but I'm not technically, I'm very bang average. So to be surrounded by other players that certainly eclipse me in terms of their competence and their ability, not just to like play the parts, but like the sound that they produce and to have that be distinct and unique, like that's incredible. So the Star Chamber could never ever have happened without the band that I have. I think previous releases, yeah, I could have and did
Yeah.
use them more or less as a solo artist, but Star Chamber, there'd have been no hope in hell of me doing that on my own. So yeah, honestly, this record is massively owed to the band. But yeah, the theatricality of it as well is something that's, I don't know, it was something I was really drawn to. Like, how progressive can you make your music whilst also making it really camp and theatrical? Because people tend to think of like prog rock, it's stodgy old guys with like band shirts and the long hair and all that, and it's very self-indulgent. There's a lot I like about prog rock, but there's a lot about the presentation and the aesthetics that sometimes put me off. So I'm thinking, how can you take the best bits of that, but also, as you sort of alluded to, make it really theatrical, really camp, and really almost so far over the top that you're just totally bewildered in a good way. So that was the aim.
Yeah, well, actually, by coincidence, I'd been listening to the album, and then one night over Christmas, I just happened to catch the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I hadn't done for ages. And I went, there's something of that. As you say, camp, high camp, really well presented, but great songs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had a review of the album in Snack Magazine, which was an incredible review. It was as over the top as the music itself was. And I think you mentioned Rocky Horror Picture Show, but what's the other one? What's the thing in Little Shop of Horrors called? The Venus Flytrap.
Yeah, yeah. I should know that, yes.
Combination of like that and Rocky Horror Picture Show, I'd say Star Chamber just sits between those two really neatly, I think.
I was thinking about the whole idea of rock opera and wondered if, because there was, particularly in the 70s and 80s, there was, it was quite a big deal. You obviously had you doing Tommy and things like that. I'm interested in influences perhaps more with this album than I would be with other albums, because it feels to me that you've got influences which, yes, there are musical ones, but there are others, which affect your music too, whether that be art, theatre, books, that kind of thing. Is that correct, would you say?
Aye, absolutely bang on. I would say, I think like this was because I'll hold my hand up and say like, I've been making music for a long time. Now, people would sort of often say to me, "Oh, you must love Frank Zappa. You must be a big Frank Zappa fan." And I'd say to them, "Not really, to be honest. Like, I know a handful of tunes, but I've never really sort of deep dived." And so it was a few years ago. I was like, "Right, I better get this Zappa thing out the road then." And so I did my deep dive, and yeah, his Joe's Garage, his sort of rock opera, I suppose. That was a massive influence on this one, because I mean, rock opera is obviously, the concept is inherently ridiculous. So if you're going to do it, you've got to ramp up the ridiculousness as far as it can possibly go. And yeah, that kind of like sort of quite knowing over the top quality that sort of Joe's Garage has, where it's got the, he's playing the sort of character who's like commenting on his own thing, like all the way, all that meta stuff. Yeah, that was a massive sort of influence. Also, this is really not cool, but there's a band called Magma, who are like sort of German sort of prog band from like the 70s, 80s.
Yeah, I'm aware of their work. Yeah, absolutely.
Aware of their work, who sort of like invented their own language to like the main guy, the drummer and lyricist, just like it went full Tolkien and just like invented and his own language to like sing the songs and stuff like that. It's just so obviously over the top. I don't know. It's like it's something you kind of go back and forth on, because you think like, well, you mentioned rock opera, of course, and it having had a heyday in the 70s and 80s, and of course nowadays you think where's the attention span for that? You know what I mean? If it's hard enough to get people to listen to a conventional album's worth of music, let alone a 3-disc rock opera. But I don't know. I think with like Star Chamber, it was a funny one because we've got these singles peppered throughout, which I do think work, but they're almost sort of little hooks to get people into a world which is quite different. Once people listen to the record, I think they might be like, "Oh, right, it's nothing like that."
Yeah,
the dance pop single that I just heard 5 minutes ago. but yeah, in terms of like other influences, like I don't know, man. Like it's the cheesy one to say, obviously, but like David Lynch's cinema and television has always been massive for me as a wee guy, teenager. Seeing Mulholland Drive for the first time, I remember the feeling more than what actually happens in the film, just that feeling of like, right, cinema doesn't have to be a conventionally told narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have it sort of neatly explained to you with a bow on top at the end. Cinema, film, any sort of fiction actually can leave you with this sense that, it's a box, and every, time you think you've got your way into the box, you've unwrapped the box, it's just another box, and it's just a riddle and riddle and riddle. And that in and of itself can be the pleasure rather than finding the solution or the explanation, And I think like with everything I've ever done, I'm always trying to like recapture that sort of feeling, where people are left with the questions, the riddles, the intrigue, but nothing's actually been explained, everything's sort of left unresolved. So yeah, that sort of influence weighs heavy as well.
And you're right about the singles. You see, you've got still kind of unconventional, but 3 minute, 4 minute pop singles. We'll hear another one later on. But you've also got longer tracks, 6 minute tracks, which kind of really expand the kind of music that you're wanting to make. And was
Yeah,
that something that you wanted to do, kind of give the chance to let the band breathe, if you like, really kind of get them to go where they wanted?
yeah, 100%. And I think it was like, that idea of like, can you build up tension, like real sort of visceral, exciting tension in a way that's also quite kind of progressive, almost tricksy, kind of quite technically competent. I think on the longer tracks you're mentioning, like Down from the Mountain and Execution, are the two big ones on the record. And I think, we've pretty much managed to do that. The payoff when everything finally blows up is good, it's big. But the journey that it takes to get there is really meandering, really kind of playful, a lot of kind of like, oh, is this it? Is this maybe it? No, it's not that. Is this it? And I think that the kind of when we were sitting down with the producer, how I explained to him that I wanted it to feel, again, bringing it back to the kind of cinema or the film stuff, is like from section to section, I wanted it to feel quite like radically different, like a jump cut from in film, from one thing to another, totally separate from each other. I wanted like almost a mix of the song to just from one section to another to radically change, to really disorient people and to disjoint them in time. And again, that's something I think we've managed to do. So yeah, bit of a big test, I think, to write these big songs and think that they're still going to kind of get people in the gut. It's hard to tell when you haven't played them live yet, but we went out and we did a tour, and you're playing them in front of people, and you're like, yeah, people are getting this. Actually, I think they're getting it even more when they come and see us in the room.
I was going to ask you about playing live because I know you did a few gigs late last year. So they were successful. I mean, it sounds to me an album that really wants to be heard live.
Yeah, definitely. The gigs were really successful. Thanks, small part to our record label who've helped us with a lot with the ones down south. Because it's tough. Like I've done plenty of tours before, both myself and with the band, and obviously the further away you go or you get from home, the more of a sort of roll of the dice it is as to whether anyone will actually book you, and then if they do book you, whether anyone will actually turn up. So to have a record label who are based in Cambridge be that sort of conduit to get us good crowds down south has been brilliant. But yeah, the gigs went really well, and I think again, it's just really rewarding to see it translate and make sense in a room, because in your darker moments you just sort of end up worrying like, oh, is this stuff just really sort of intellectualized? Is it sort of just kind of pretentious rubbish? Are people just going to be sitting stroking their chins with their arms crossed thinking, what is this? And then you get into the room and then you play it and people are actually feeling it in their bodies, and you see it translating and it making sense in that kind of visceral way. And it's that's really what it's all about.
And other plans to do future live gigs? Have you got anything?
Yeah, 100%. We really hope to. We're kind of in chatting to a few people just now. There's a lot of places we didn't get on tour in November there mainly kind of like the north of England. Like we didn't really get to like Manchester or Leeds or Liverpool or anywhere like that. So I'm trying to get a tour lined up for maybe later this year, but it's kind of like, get to all the places we didn't get to last time. And then obviously just about trying to play around about Glasgow a lot more. I think we basically kind of dipped out of the scene for a year and a bit while we wrote and made the record. So I think now it's going to just be about, playing as much as we can. But yeah, there's plans to get a lot more on the go this year, but it's still the sort of, it's all still being finalised.
And is touring, when you've got this set band now, increasingly difficult? When it was yourself, as you say, you could play a set solo, or maybe you might have a few people with you. You could judge that, but this sounds like a record. You need everyone there. Is that fair enough?
It is definitely fair enough, and I think that's the massive challenge. I mean, like the grim reality of it is, I think if you go away and you tour yourself, as I have done in the past, with maybe just a keyboard or a guitar or whatever, and you do it on the dates, like you can make a bit of money, come back home happy. If you're touring with a band, you're incredibly lucky if you even break even. Well, at this level that we're at, probably going to lose a bit of cash because of all the extra costs involved, just needing to transport people and gear and everything from place to place. So, I mean, I'm walking both paths. I think you need to be realistic and say that unless we get some mysterious benefactor emerging from the shadows, we are on the hunt for a mysterious benefactor, by the way, if anyone's listening. But unless we get sort of an influx of cash from somewhere, we're going to have to be selective with the full band dates that we do. But I can still perform some of these songs at least. Solo capacity live looks and feels a bit different, but I think it's still a really engaging live show. I think I'm trying to follow after. Like, do you follow BT Camplight? Is he someone that you're aware of? So I think he's really good at he can do an excellent show on his own with a piano, an excellent show with his full band. And he's quite painstaking when he tours about like which is which, so people know what they're getting. And I think that's the model I'm going to try and follow coming into the new year, because yes, I want to get out there and play as much as possible, but you also have to be realistic about, can you assemble your band all in one place and get the van and get the hotel and all that business, So there's going to be both in the coming year, I would say.
Going back to the record, there are themes which, it seems to me, which run through it. Could you talk a bit about those?
Yeah, I think thematically, that's where Star Chamber sort of started. Was sort of on this. It's all about sort of guilt, really. The theme of the record is guilt, about being sort of, I suppose, excommunicated. That quite primal idea of being like cast out from your people, from your tribe, or from yourself. Right, you're on the outside now. Because you've done something kind of fundamentally wrong, right? You've transgressed in some way. So I was sort of like thinking about psychologically, mythically, poetically, where that kind of thing comes from. Because like, as a person myself, I think I've always been quite, always felt a little bit defective, and always very, very quick to kind of blame myself, scold myself for things, put myself in the bracket of being wrong, even though I probably haven't done anything wrong. It's just it's this impulse, and so I've always been kind of like, where does that actually come from? Do you know what I mean? What is that? What is the root of that self blame? And so the idea of like the Star Chamber, which is this kind of you maybe hear the phrase getting bandied about from time to time. It sort of means almost like a Kafka-esque sort of court where people, you're tried, you're judged, but like there's no due process, so the workings are really shady and it's all a bit rigged. You know what I mean? Like, so when like Joseph Kay in the trial, right? He's in the Star Chamber, right? So it's that kind of idea of, but sort of turning it inward and saying like, what is this court inside us that we all, I think, have to a greater or lesser extent, where we kind of blame and we put ourselves on trial for things that we may or may not have actually ever done. So that was the kind of root of it, and I guess all of the songs on the record are played with the idea of guilt in sort of different ways, like on Instrumentality, which is one of the singles we released. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about how quite fun, like that almost philosophical idea of like, as a human being, is there anything else to do other than to give yourself and your whole being up and over to someone else entirely, and the guilt of like living any sort of a life for yourself when it could be being lived for other people, but also like the fundamental impossibility of that, right? We cannot completely give ourselves over to another person or another thing or another cause. We kind of surrender our individuality entirely, right? But the kind of the tension and the guilt inherent in that, and then other songs like Old Goat, I suppose, is another one towards the end of the record. Like that was all about, like I got my Irish passport recently through my gran, who's now departed, but she was born on the island of Ireland. So I was able to claim citizenship through her. And with that one, I was thinking about like, right, isn't it strange that I'm now considered classed a citizen or a nation of this country that, well, this, let's be honest, I don't even know. I've been in a jolly to Dublin, but like, what does it mean to say you belong to a place you don't even know, and the kind of guilt inherent in almost like that sense of I'm labeling myself as this or I've been labeled as this, but I don't actually know what it means to be. I don't have that connection. So I don't know. The guilt is definitely the theme that you can kind of draw through the whole record, and each of the songs are like a different formulation of that.
Well, we're going to hear in a moment the power of positive thinking. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. Is it anything to do with the book by Norman Vincent Peale?
I wish I could say yes, but I must say I'm unfamiliar with that particular
Well,
book.
okay, because my dad, bless him, was kind of obsessed with this book when we were kids growing up. He would kind of have it on the go all the time. I think it was again just trying to kind of give himself a bit of a boost, if you like. So this was a huge selling book in I don't know how far back, it may even be the 60s, but certainly in the 70s.
So that is the book then that the phrase came from.
Well, I'm guessing that's where it comes from, the
Oh
power
yeah,
of.
I think I'm drawing on that as a thing that's out there. I didn't actually read the book itself,
Yeah,
but
no,
yeah.
no. I just but talk a little bit about the track then and what it means to you, and the idea behind it.
Aye, so Power of Positive Thinking was a bit of a strange one because that song, like in some variation, has been knocking about since the very earliest days of Peter Cat. It's actually a sort of proto demo version of it is on the very first cassette tape that I ever released, way back before COVID and all that. But it was a funny one because I always had this chorus like with the melody of the Power of Positive Thinking over these big sort of soaring chords, and I was like, that's a good chorus. I need to do something properly with that one day. But when you've only got the chorus and that one phrase, and you don't know what the song's actually meant to be about, for me that's difficult because I'll always write the lyrics on their own first, and then I'll sort of fit them to existing music. Just to have the hook first and then have to work backwards was quite unnatural. So I think it's more of a piece of sort of surreal short fiction more than anything. It's about that idea of like the world's sort of gone to pot, you know. There's no water anymore. There's bands of vigilantes roaming the countryside, taking people out. Right? It's a post-apocalyptic dystopia. And what do? You sort of like bury your head in the sand and you say, "Well, I'm all right. I've got my wee greenhouse here, my wee plants that I'll sort of water with the last of my rations. I've got a good life." So it's a sort of surreal, sort of post-apocalyptic fiction. But I was thinking a lot about like denial of and ignorance, willful ignorance of a lot of things, and the idea of kind of like the theme of trepanning features a lot in the song as a sort of means to like let God out or in of the skull. I don't know. It's one of those songs on the record that's less prescriptive. I think it's a bit more of a fever dream, a bit more surreal. But the power of positive thinking is a phrase. I was trying to sort of turn it on its head and say like, well, that's almost like a mantra that someone repeats to themselves.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it
is. In the sand and pretending that the world isn't on fire, you know. So that's kind of what that song is to me.
It's interesting that you said it's been around for years and right from the beginning of Peter Cat, because you could say it's more relevant today than perhaps it has ever been before.
I think so, yeah. I think you see a lot of people retreating, especially as they get a bit older, which I would say I am certainly older at now than I was back when I first wrote that chorus. I think it's something that you kind of constantly have to remain vigilant against and to guard against, you know, as you get a bit older, slipping into the known things, known comforts, taking refuge in your own little plot of land. You know what I mean? Not that I have a plot of land, I'm not a landowner, but metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
you really have to try to harder to pay attention, and stay vigilant to some things in the world that need fixed or that could be better.
Well, Peter, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to me. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure for me too. Thank you so much for making the time, and yeah, all the best to you. Thank you so much, Ali.
And this is Peter Catt and the power of positive thinking.